Morning, all. All right, so we're up to the 1954-1955 season. Mid-50s, we are getting closer and closer, of course, to the NHL's expansion in 1967, but at this point, things are pretty steady. In fact, the six teams finished in the exact same order as the last season. Detroit 42, 17, and 11, so it's pretty easy. I just erase yesterday's numbers and just leave it all the same. But Detroit is now coached by Jimmy Skinner. They finished with 95 points with that record of 42, 17, and 11. 204 goals scored, 134 goals against. Pretty good time to be a Detroit fan. Montreal 41, 18, and 11 overall under the coaching of Dick Irvin. 93 points, 228 goals scored, 157 goals against. For the Toronto Maple Leafs, they finish at 500, 24, 24, and 22. So almost a third of their games end in a tie. 147 goals scored, 135 goals against. For Boston, they finished with a record of 23, 26, and 21, 169 goals scored, 188 goals against, 67 points under coach Milt Schmidt. The New York Rangers, under the coaching of Muzz Patrick, 17, 35, and 18, 52 points. So they missed the playoffs by 15 points, 150 goals scored, 210 goals against. The Chicago Blackhawks finished 24 points out of the playoffs under Frank Edels. 13, 40, and 17 is their record for 43 points. 161 goals scored, 235 goals against. The biggest issue Chicago had during this era wasn't just the lack of wins, it was just so many goals against. So whether that's the defense or the goaltending, you'd have to ask somebody who watched them in the 50s. But Maurice Richard really is the storyline this season. And the separatists in Quebec might have got their start. And I'm talking about like in the 80s when Quebec had a vote on whether or not to leave Canada. It really may have started with the Maurice Richard, the Richard Riot, and all of that. Maurice Richard was looked up to by French Canadians, and he was seen as taking that fight to the Anglophones. The Anglophones that ran the league and around the league, he was kind of their hero. So he stood up to everybody on and off the ice, including, as previously mentioned in the video, basically, arguing with an official right in a hotel and all that fun stuff. He's been fined a lot. And Clarence Campbell and Maurice Richard have a very adversarial relationship. As mentioned in yesterday's video, Maurice Richard, penned an article on how much of a crappy president Clarence Campbell was for the National Hockey League for suspending Boom Boom Geoffrion. So this is not getting better, and Clarence Campbell was somebody who could hold a grudge. Absolutely could. Ask the WHA in the 70s. Hal Laycoe of the Bruins. Now, during this game, what I was reading, the Bruins have been trying to get under Maurice Richard's skin just a little bit. And I'm not sure why. So I understand that he has a bad temper, and I understand you're trying to tick him off a little bit. But he seems like the kind of player that probably played better when he was angry, so I'm not sure it was the smartest thing. But near the end of the game, Hal Laycoe of the Boston Bruins clips, so with the stick, Rocket Richard near the eye. So Rocket Richard kind of loses it. He hit a linesman for restraining him, trying to get back at Laycoe. Clarence Campbell suspended him for the rest of the season. So, province of Quebec, not Montreal, the province of Quebec, hates Clarence Campbell. Clarence Campbell decides, you know what would be nice? I'm going to go watch a hockey game. I'm going to go watch a hockey game in Montreal, because that's where the NHL's head office is at this point, is in Montreal. It's a terrible idea. The fans, not happy seeing Clarence Campbell there. There's a riot that follows. So that was on March the 17th, which was 4 days after the incident with Hal Laycoe that got Richard suspended for the rest of the season, and that included playoffs. So the riot ends up causing $100,000 in property damage. 37 people are injured, and roughly 100 people are arrested as well during this riot, which I just picture Clarence Campbell as the actual literal representation of the dog in the middle of the fire going, this is fine. This is all right. Because seriously, who does that? You know that the whole province hates your guts. You're going to go watch a hockey game in the middle of them? You're going to have that kind of cojones? Anyways. So that's what leads to that. So when you're about the Richard riot, you can, I almost feel like it should be called the Clarence Campbell riot. I understand why it's called the Richard riot, but Campbell definitely didn't help. So Campbell, in his 1,200-word suspension letter explaining the suspension. I wish the NHL had to write a 1,200-word essays on why a guy gets suspended now. That'd be kind of funny. But the reason that Clarence Campbell didn't buy Maurice Richard's defense was that after Hal Laycoe had hit him with his stick, that he was a little bit dazed, didn't really know too much about where he was. So he thought that the official was a member of the Bruins. He couldn't see very well, and guy grabs onto him, and you turn around and you hit him. Clarence Campbell did not buy this, in part because Maurice Richard returned to the bench to grab his stick. And he was kind of known for, when a guy made him mad, he'd go get his stick. Because what better way to let a guy know that you're angry at him than grabbing your stick and trying to, chop him down a little bit. Not a lot, just a little. I'm not talking about beating, just a little right here, right the collarbone. But that was why Campbell suspended him. Didn't believe him and said that this is behavior we can't have in the National Hockey League. Again, as I've been mentioning in this video series over the last 10 videos, I think, roughly, if Maurice Richard had played the game today, there were people who would have absolutely loved him, and there were people who would have absolutely loathed him. So, Wings general manager Jack Adams felt the suspension wasn't enough. Ted Lindsay kind of agrees with him. They felt like after hitting an official, that a ban for life absolutely would have been warranted. Would have been more than $100,000 in damage if Clarence Campbell had done that, and it would have got a lot worse. And here's the thing too. So for the last 3 games of the season before the playoffs, Richard's out. He was leading the race for the Art Ross Trophy. This is a trophy he never won in his career. On the final night of the Montreal Canadiens season at home, Boom Boom Geoffrion, or Bernie Geoffrion, ends up getting the 75th point that would put him past Maurice Richard, and the fans booed him. The fans booed their own guy at home because he was going to win the Art Ross Trophy, and they didn't feel like that was right because it was rightfully Richard's. Why was he suspended? He hit an official. It's so weird. I don't know what people expect. You hit an official, you're going to get suspended. December 18th of 1955, or 54, I should say, Maurice Richard, earlier in the season, before all this drama happened, actually becomes the first NHL player to 400 goals. So that's good news, right? And lost in the middle of all this, March 30th of 1955, as the regular season comes to an end, Terry Sawchuk is the first goaltender to have 3 40-win seasons in the National Hockey League in its history. Now, part of that, of course, is the fact that it's a 70-game schedule. Part of that is that goaltenders play every game at this point, but still, it is noteworthy. And also, this is the season where Don Cherry plays the only NHL hockey game that he would play, and that would be a playoff game for the Bruins against the Montreal Canadiens. So he never played a regular season game, and by today's standards, he definitely would have been an NHLer, but it's the original 6. There aren't very many jobs to go around. So, with all the Maurice Richard talk aside, our top scorers, Bernie Boom Boom Geoffrion's number 1. 70 games, 38 goals, 37 assists, 75 points. Maurice Richard is next. 67 games, 38 goals, 36 assists, 74 points. So Richard probably would have got to 40 goals. Definitely would have won the scoring title, but he was suspended. Jean Beliveau, 70 games, 37 goals, 36 assists, 73 points. Remarkable how close Geoffrion, Richard, and Beliveau's totals are. Earl Rival, playing for Detroit, 70 games, 25 goals, 41 assists, 66 points. Gordie Howe, 64 games played, 29 goals, 33 assists, 62 points. Red Sullivan in Chicago, 69 games, 19 goals, 42 assists, 61 points. So Terry Sawchuk wins the Vezina Trophy, which goes to the goaltender for the team with the lowest goals against average. Detroit allows 1 less goal than Toronto. When you actually look at goals against average, Harry Lumley was actually better than Sawchuk, just barely. Sawchuk finishes with a record of 40, 17, and 11, 1.94 goals against, and 12 shutouts. Jacques Plante, playing for Montreal, of course, 31, 13, and 7, 2.1 goals against, and 5 shutouts. Harry Lumley for Toronto, 23, 24, and 22, 1.93 goals against average, and 8 shutouts. John Henderson for Boston, 15, 13, and 16, 2.47 goals against, and 5 shutouts. And Gump Worsley takes over again in New York. 15, 33, and 17 record, 3.00 goals against, and 4 shutouts. The Hart Trophy that year goes to Ted Kennedy of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Art Ross, of course, goes to Boom Boom Geoffrion of the Montreal Canadiens. The Norris Trophy goes to, and the Norris Trophy was awarded in 1954, so we'll mention that here. I missed that yesterday. Red Kelly won it for Detroit in 1954. In 1955, the Norris Trophy for Best Defenseman, of course, goes to Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens. The Calder Trophy goes to Ed Litzenberger of the Chicago Blackhawks. The Vezina goes to Terry Sawchuk of the Detroit Red Wings. And the Lady Byng goes to Sid Smith of the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you wanted to have some fun, you could try to play it off that Ed Litzenberger went on to play Cliff Clavin on Cheers and then was the voice of the pig in Toy Story. It's not, but you could probably convince somebody. It's close. Ratzenberger, Linsenberger, for sure. Why not? All right, so your All-Stars that year, down the middle, Jean Beliveau, first-team All-Star for Montreal. Ken Mosdell of Montreal, second-team All-Star. On the right side, Maurice Richard's the first-team All-Star. Bernie Geoffrion is the second-team All-Star. So there you go. On the left side, Sid Smith of Toronto's the first-team All-Star. Danny Lewicki is the second-team All-Star for the Rangers. On the blue line, Doug Harvey for Montreal is first-team alongside Red Kelly of Detroit, so the first 2 Norris Trophy winners. Bob Goldham of Detroit is second-team All-Star, and Fern Flaman is second-team All-Star for Boston. In net, Harry Lumley of Toronto is first team. Terry Sawchuk of Detroit, second team. So, Lumley and Sawchuk are really, really close. And yeah, so what's also interesting is if you look up goals against average, and I'm including the book that I have. So, the book that I use for this series is Total NHL. And then I have certain, websites I check and everything. None of the goals against average numbers are the same because it's the 1950s and they weren't quite as vigilant, I guess. Numbers have changed over the years, but yeah, it was close. Not 1.93 for Harry Lumley, 1.94 for Sawchuk, but since Detroit allowed one less goal, Sawchuk gets the Vezina Trophy. So in the playoffs, it's Toronto and Detroit again, Montreal and Boston again. Montreal and Boston is bad matchup for Boston, but first Detroit and Toronto. Detroit, this isn't close. They win 7-4 and 2-1 at home. Then they go to Toronto, they win 2-1 and 3-0. So Detroit sweeps aside Toronto in that first round. Montreal wins both games at home against Boston, 2-0 and 3-1 respectively. Then Boston wins at home to get themselves on the board with a 4-2 win before Montreal wins in overtime, 4-3. Montreal wins the 5th game at home, 5-1, to win the series in 5 and go to the final where they play Detroit again. This is the 3rd final. These teams have played against one another in the 50s. Montreal and Detroit means Detroit wins at home the first 2 games, 4-2 and 7-1, before Montreal asserts themselves at home, scores of 4-2 and 5-3 to even the series. Detroit wins at home again, 5-1, and then Montreal wins at home 6-3 before Detroit wins at home again 3-1. Home ice advantage works. Detroit wins the Stanley Cup in 7 games, and it's another Stanley Cup for Gordie Howe and that dynasty that they've got there in Detroit. But as I've said, Montreal is going to go on quite a run themselves, and we're getting close to that time. But yeah, this season was really overshadowed by the Richard Riot in Montreal, and just that cultural battle between Quebec and people outside of Quebec that was very, very pronounced at the time. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.